The witch was never meant to belong. From the beginning, they stood outside the bounds of polite society, ungovernable, dangerous, and strange. The witch was not an invention of evil, but a byproduct of fear, of independence, of mystery, of refusal. And in that sense, the witch is kin to every outcast who has ever been thrown out of a church, locked out of a boardroom, run off from a village, or beaten for being too queer, too poor, too loud, too wild. The witch was made to wear the mask of the monster because they refused the leash. Punk magic begins here, with a middle finger raised to the institutions that made monsters out of healers and heretics. The same systems that burned witches now bleach the bones of spiritual traditions, selling them back to the public as overpriced white candles and mass produced sage bundles. Punk magic sees through that charade. It remembers what they tried to erase, that the witch was not the problem, the witch was the resistance. Before the noose, before the fire, there was the wise one at the edge of the village, the herbalist, the cunning man, the spirit worker. These people lived close to the land, close to death, close to the things the church couldn't control. They didn't need Latin to speak to spirits, nor priests to bless their thresholds. Their knowledge was visceral: blood, breath, bone, root. It didn't come from books sanctioned by the authorities. It came from the forest, the graveyard, the whispered words of a dying grandmother. That was the first sin, knowing things for yourself. Then came the Inquisition, the Witchfinder General, the brutal rise of the church and state as two fangs in the same mouth. It was never really about belief, it was about obedience. Witchcraft became a crime when it gave the powerless too much agency. If your prayers could heal the sick or curse a lord, you were dangerous. If you didn't need the church, you threatened the order. The witch trials were not about stamping out evil, they were about erasing the margins, erasing the other. They were about fear management. We should never forget that the people branded as witches were often women who owned land, refused marriage, or knew how to ease pain without asking for permission. They were midwives and widows, queer men, and solitary wanderers, people without patrons, people without protectors, people with power who couldn't be bought, taxed, or tamed. The witch was everything the new regime couldn't stomach: poor but proud, spiritual but unchurched, rooted but rebellious. The village needed a scapegoat. Whenever the crop failed, or a baby died, or the local patriarch felt small in his own skin, the witch was the answer. She cursed me, he would say, when really she rejected him. She poisoned the child, they would whisper when the child had starved. The witch bore the sins of the village not because she caused them, but because she reminded people of what they didn't want to see. In this way, the witch was both a mirror and a mask, reflecting the sickness of society, and then being made to wear its face. What the witch reveals is how fragile the lie of civilization really is. Scratch the surface, and out comes the pyres, out comes the nooses, out come the frightened masses clutching at holy water because someone dared to live differently. The outcast is not exiled for doing harm. The outcast is exiled for breaking the illusion. This is where punk magic draws its first blood. It rejects the fantasy that authority equals morality. It spits on the idea that tradition means truth. Punk magic remembers that the systems calling witches evil were the same ones that owned slaves, silenced women, tortured queers, and called it holy. So when we say the witch is an outcast, we are saying the witch belongs outside the fence because the fence is the problem. Witchcraft has always thrived in the shadows, in the ruins, in the in-between. It lives in graveyards, abandoned buildings, forest clearings, urban alleys, and the edges of maps where authority stopped checking. Why? Because magic doesn't need permission. It needs will, vision, desperation, and love. The witch, the true witch, is not a curated Instagram aesthetic. The true witch is the kid who got kicked out of school for being weird, the queer who ran from home, the survivor who whispers curses under their breath just to keep going. The witch is the broken-hearted rebel who lights candles, not because it's cute, but because it's the only language that gets through the night. From the old world to the new, the witch persists because someone has to carry the wildness forward. Someone has to remember the gods that don't live in cathedrals. Someone has to talk to the dead when no one else will. And someone has to hex the king. So here we stand at the threshold. Witches are outcasts. They still are. And Punk Magick doesn't try to fix that, it honors it. We do not seek entry into their systems. We piss on their gates and build our own altars from the rusted wire and broken glass of their failures. Our grimoires are stitched from graffiti and grief. Our spells are spells of survival. We wear our exile like war paint. Because the witch is not here to be accepted. The witch is here to outlive them all. Exile doesn't just hurt, it transforms. Once you've been pushed out, cast aside, labelled too much or too strange or too dangerous, you begin to see the cracks in the system that rejected you, and that's where the real magic begins. The margins are not empty, they are brimming. With ghosts, with gods, with visionaries, with those who have nothing left to lose and everything left to imagine. The witch lives here, not as a victim, but as a sovereign. The margins are where empires rot and revolution takes root. This is the heartbeat of Punk Magick. We do not return to the center begging for crumbs. We make power from what we have. Rust, bone, broken mirrors, spit, code, music, blood. The outcast becomes the alchemist, turning pain into prophecy, rejection into rebellion, and exile into initiation. You cannot control what does not fear you, and the outcast no longer fears you. That's why witches are still hated, still mocked, still flattened into Halloween caricatures or Instagram cliches, because even now, even after centuries of burning, drowning, and silencing, the witch remains free in a way the world cannot tolerate, free from the need to understand, free from the rules of dogma, free from the performance of obedience. There is a spiritual voltage in being outcast. Ask any punk who found community in a squat. Ask any queer who learned to cast glamours for protection. Ask any neurospicy kid who discovered they could talk to animals and plants more easily than people. There is something that happens when you are exiled, something wild and permanent and irreducible. You stop trying to fit the mold and start becoming the fire that melts it. Magic is, at its core, the art of shaping reality according to will. And who has more will than the person who's had everything outstripped from them? Who knows more about reality than the person who has survived outside of it? Historically, the tools of witchcraft have always belonged to the disinherited, the rebellious. It was never about golden wands or important resins. It was about making do with what you had: salt, thread, bone, spit, breath, the dead and the dirt and the dream. Every folk spell is an act of defiance. A whispered prayer when the priest wouldn't listen, a curse stitched into a doll when justice wouldn't come, a protection charm scrawled under the bed because the world is full of predators. Witchcraft is a refusal to be helpless. It is not about morality, it is about power. The power to say no, the power to endure, the power to bite back. And that's where Punk Magick intersects perfectly. Both witchcraft and punk are born of dissatisfaction with the world as it is. Both are DIY systems of power. Both distrust hierarchy and authority. Both say, we'll do it ourselves. Punk doesn't ask permission, neither does the witch. This is not whitewashed Wicca or commodified left-hand path bullshit wrapped up in lies. This is enchantment with blood under its nails. This is the spell you scream rather than chant. This is spiritual survivalism. You use what you've got, you make it holy, and if it hurts, you make it a weapon. We must rewrite the witch in our image, not the image they gave us. Not the hag meant to scare children into obedience, not the influencer peddling moon water to the algorithm. The true witch is awkward, angry, grieving, queer, neurospicy, disabled, loud, sacred, furious, alive. The true witch uses what hurts to build what heals. Because it is in that tension, in that paradox of pain and power, that the deepest magic lives. The outcast is not an empty category, it is a crucible. You go in human, you come out something else, a monster, a prophet, a witch. This is why the witch can speak to the dead, because they know what it's like to be invisible. This is why the witch can bend the world, because they already live beyond it. This is why the witch becomes an outcast, because they are here to remake the world, not to fix it, but to shatter it and start again. We make our altars from broken things, punk patches and sigils, rusted chains and stolen moments of peace. This is where our gods live, not in temples, but in bathrooms and back alleys, in burned out factories and notebook margins. We meet our spirits in code and candlelight, in the scream of distortion pedals and the silence of solitary walks. We do not ask the world to include us, we enchant our own. And that's the deepest truth of punk magic. The outcast is not waiting to be saved. We are not interested in spiritual enlightenment that costs $500 and requires white clothing. We're not impressed by glossy witches or curated feeds. We want dirt under our nails. We want blood in the ink. We want gods who remember what it's like to starve. Punk magic is not a trend, it's a weapon, and exile is the forge. So when they cast us out, we don't mourn. We grin, we spit, we light candles made of grease and wax and hope. We call to our dead, we raise spirits and middle fingers, and we remember the margins are where the magic always begins. Because every system will collapse eventually, and the outcasts will be the ones left standing. The witch never truly vanished. They were buried under centuries of ash and accusation, hunted out of history books and painted as nightmare. But like all spirits exiled from the world of the living, they didn't die, they went underground, and now the earth is cracking. The witch has returned, not as they once feared, but as we now choose. No longer just the outcast, but the avatar of rebellion. No longer merely the scapegoat, but the instigator. This is not a nostalgic revival. This is not the witch being rebranded for market shelves. This is the outcast returning not to be accepted, but to be reckoned with. We are surrounded by witches now, or at least the idea of them. They grace the covers of magazines, show up in fashion campaigns, and sell luxury candles. There are crystals in chain stores and tarot decks at airport gift shops. And on the surface, it may seem like the witch has been welcomed back into the world. But inclusion is not the same as liberation. Much of this so-called witch revival is a spectacle, spirituality sanitized for mass consumption, safe, aesthetic, apolitical. It's witchcraft without the wound, ritual without risk. It strips the witch of their teeth and sells them as empowerment light, a self-care hashtag. But real witchcraft has never been safe. It was born from hunger and rage and silence. It doesn't purr, it growls. Punk magic calls bullshit. It doesn't want the witch defanged and domesticated. It wants them wild, filthy, laughing with their mouth full of blood and broken prayers. It wants them back in the alleys and the fields, talking to spirits and planning revolution. The witch doesn't need a stage. The witch needs a threshold. The threshold is where magic happens, not in the light or the dark, but in the shifting place between. That's where the ancestors speak. That's where the daemons walk. That's where we meet our power, not in the spotlight, but in the liminal. The witch understands the sacred not as something pristine, but something powerful, something alive in rot, in ruin, in rage, in the places the world said were unclean. That's why witches keep skulls on altars and light candles for the dead. Why we court the wind and listen to shadows. Because we know there's wisdom there. There's medicine in what's been rejected. Punk Magick doesn't try to clean it up. It kneels in the dirt and says, yes. We don't need their churches. We don't need their validation. We have bones and breath and the names of things too old to tame. We are witches because we remember. We are witches because we refuse to forget. To be a witch today is to take a stand. It is not just a spiritual choice, it is a political act. To cast a circle is to draw a line. To perform a ritual is to say, I will shape this world on my own terms. To call on ancestors is to summon the voices of those they tried to silence. In a world that thrives on obedience, conformity, and profit, choosing the path of the witch is an act of holy defiance. We don't fit in because we're not meant to. We are not here to heal the system, we're here to hex it. To call out the spiritual leaders who are really cult recruiters, to drag the neo-fascists out of their altars and expose the hatred they sell as tradition, to rip the mask off New Age grifters who peddle stolen practices with colonial smiles. The witches have returned and they have receipts. We are not just destroyers, we are builders of strange new worlds. We plant seeds in the rubble. We build altars from protest signs and punk patches, from bone dice and birthday candles. We speak the names of gods no one remembers. We craft spells not to escape this world, but to remake it. Because the future does not belong to the priests, it belongs to the outcasts. This is not a metaphor. This is not a costume. This is a call. You who have been cast out, come closer. You who have been ridiculed, broken, queer, loud, alone, step forward. You who hear spirits in the silence and dream of fire, take your place. The world will try to tell you that magic isn't real, that rebellion is dangerous, that the witch is a myth. But look around. The systems are failing. The planet is screaming. And the dead are waking. You were made to be wild. You were made to be sacred. You were made to be witch, not the cleaned up version, not the one they tolerate, the real one, the dangerous one, the one who knows how to survive, the one who walks with exile like an ancestor, the one who comes not in surrender, but to blaze a path through the wreckage.